A wetland is everything from open water through to reed beds, to fen, to wet grassland, and through to wet woodland.
Of the floods, I think you think of actually the winter time, the wetlands, that's when it really is wet and covered in water.
Well, we have a lot of fields that are underwater for like most of the winter. So yeah, that, and then the nature reserves. Yeah, there's a lot of lakes and stuff, and it's quite boggy.
Swampy places that you would tread carefully in, and I've trodden on most of them, sometimes up to my neck.
To me, it means the land and nature people have taken over and keeping the water table high, or produce reed beds like the RSPB.
It's partly about reclaimed land, it's partly about man-made landscape, because wetlands, you know, historically either are very wet and people don't live there, or people get busy draining them. And you know, since Roman times and possibly before, people have been draining this area. So it's very rich in a sort of history and human imprint on the landscape, and at the same time it attracts sort of a wonderful variety of wildlife.
This area has now become probably the best part of the wetlands in the country because of actually digging out the peat, and it's more wildlife here than what there is over in Sedgemoor, where the peat has not been removed.
There's a lot of fields out the back that we used to ride in and that have now been dug up and are just peat lakes, and there's a lot of them around there. They're just left now and kind of get taken over by wildlife, which is quite a nice change, I guess.
Here, I very much think of the sound of the reeds. I think that's what almost epitomises it to me.
It's about water, it's about, for me, it's about vibrancy and greenery and wildlife and things. I always associate wetlands with lots of life.
Well, it never used to be called wetlands.
Levels.
Yeah, it never used to be called it. We used to call it Westhay and Moor and all that.
We never called it the Somerset Levels, it's always Somerset Moors. When you come out into the moors, it's just wild and lovely. It gives you a real sense of belonging, I think. This is your roots, really, when you're a Somerset person. It's being able to walk in the field and kick your DNA.
Every bit of the levels that I have worked on is a special place to me.
This, you know, this marvelous, magnificent place it is, you know. So it's like, you know, it's like living in heaven, really.
You have the big open sky, and the sky is reflected in the water, and the light is incredible. So it's got a very special, very unique feel to it. That wasn't actually till I lived here that I, you know, discovered any of this stuff. And now I'm like, oh, how could anyone live anywhere else?
I feel like when I'm out here, I'm working in the same environment that, yeah, my great-grandparents and my grandfather was working in, and yeah, probably doing the same type of jobs at the same time of year in the same environment.
I really like the sweet track because of the family connection and my interest in history, and the fact it was my daughter's great-grandfather. I always walk that track, and it's very peaceful. You rarely come across anybody else, and it's like you're walking into the wild and retracing steps of ancestors.
I think the wetlands do form a part of my identity now, and I think my identity has broadened because of it, and it's better for it, I think. It's almost like a sort of medicine.
I love a landscape, you know, like to rest your eyes on like the colours, the forms, the shapes. Like for me, it's like that's what life is actually about, and kind of what sustains me and gives me more joy and enjoyment in life than anything really. Like I feel, I know it sounds weird, but it's like being in love. Like I actually feel in love with the landscape.
I think there's something about in winter when there's nothing to hide. So, you know, when you see things from underneath the water, so the logs that are partially submerged, so you actually see them in the absolute clarity. So, you know, the trees will all have died down and you will see the tor absolutely stark on the landscape. I think that very much appeals to me as an artist.
A lot of the peat lakes, when we were younger, we used to go swimming in them a lot, which was quite funny, and take kayaks on them. So we spent most of the summer kayaking and swimming in peat bogs.
We used to do rab bowling here. We used to tie up a bowl of worms on some cotton on a pole. We used to stick it down in the bottom of the river here, and the eels come to the worms and they bite onto the worms, and you pull out 5 or 6 at a time and put them in. You should have a tub beside you, and you put them straight in the tub.
On a lovely day in the summer, and everything is going honky-dory, your tractors are working, your cows are behaving, there's nothing like it. On a horrible day, the end of the autumn, first part of winter, you've got places you've got to feed cows and you can't get there because you get stuck, you've got a cow missing, and you get wet feet, you get cold, you get wet, and you think, what the bloody hell am I doing out here? What am I doing? 60 years old, spuddling about out here, what the hell am I doing?
This is a soul restorer. You have a pretty horrible time. You just get in the car or you go on your bike and come down and you're in this world of peace.
Just peaceful. It's you can always come out onto any of the wetland reserves around here and just feel better.
If you come to this part of the environment, then you're going to be listening. You hear the sounds of the moorhen, you hear the coot. You know, you don't know where they are, but they're somewhere out there. And it's exciting, but it's also, you know, it's inquiry, it's relaxing. I think it's very difficult to say exactly why it does it. And I don't know if anyone actually knows why you feel better.
Well, I think it's the sounds. Those sounds have been there for hundreds of years. It's the skylarks and the stuff. When you go out there, you open the door, and we can hear the birds here, but out there it's a different sound. It's the skylarks, it's the odd redshank squeaking, it's the odd drumming snipe.
Yeah, there's nothing better than going out there, you know, you can't hear it so much at night, but you go out there and you hear a lapwing calling, or a broody snipe. You know, that's the thing you don't hear now. You used to go out and hear the broody snipe, you know, that's a lovely sight. Out in the middle of nowhere, and you hear that, you think, Jesus, this is, you know, there's nothing like it. Nothing like it.
I love every evening at this time of year, the starlings congregate in the fields around us and on the telegraph wires and on the trees. And then they all fly off and congregate down on the moors and, you know, the reed beds. And it's an extraordinary phenomenon.
Wherever they're roosting around here, you always get a significant number coming right over there. And quite often you'll just see them rushing across this stretch here. And I really enjoy the feeling of being in the middle of that.
Being able to go out into nature and just not have all of the distractions of modern life, that's very, very grounding or mindful, and brings you back to a place where all of the daily grind and stress is kind of eliminated a little bit.
I get lifted by coming down here because I sort of know, hey, I'm now going to go out and do some sound recording, and I know what that's going to feel like. Even on a bad day, it's still good. And on a good day, it's really good. If that makes sense.
We run a centre for people with learning disabilities, so part of that is that we give them opportunities, and hence the name Westhay Opportunity Centres, and whether it could be animal care, or it could be gardening, or it could be conservation work, or it could be craft work, but everything is done for a purpose. It's to get them out into the environment and appreciate the environment they're working in, really.
I get to take my children out into nature and teach them things that they're not learning in the curriculum in school, what the plants are and what the animals and the wildlife are in the landscape around where they live.
There are more things like forest schools that now bring children out, but I don't know about the local schools around here, whether they ever get them outside to the wetlands. They're not that far, quite a few of the schools, but it is a problem, and there's there's lacking of resources now.
You end up with some interesting conversations with people, learning a lot from the people you talk to, and sometimes just spotting something and sharing that with them.
I've been lucky in that Natural England have been able to give me training to be able to use bits of equipment that I wouldn't have had the training to do so.
I do look upon it as a bit of a challenge. There's always something you think, oh, what was that? I don't quite recognise that. And it gets you then more involved with the subject. You're listening a bit harder to the next time you hear that. You're trying to work out what the hell it is. But yeah, it's that you never stop learning.
Quite often you've got to do a lot of walking if it's wet and you've got to walk around the animals, so physically it keeps you fit and you've got to pull the odd one out of the ditch. I have actually had to swim up the river once to get one out which wouldn't come out the river.
Knees are gone now, they're gone. So it's arthritis. So it's probably damp weather, damp surroundings, and I've been prohibited in what I can do, and it is very frustrating.
Quite a few of my grandparents and stuff that live down here, they always say because of the wet and the cold, they can really feel it in their joints a lot of the time. So I think they find winter quite difficult.
Volunteering gives you that physical exercise, and it again helps, mentally as well.
It is being outdoors, being with people who are all interesting people in their in their own background and so on, doing something worthwhile, maintaining an environment, improving it on occasions. It's everything that's involved in it, really.
It's got very good paths that go through it. It's an ideal place for people to almost accidentally take exercise.
I need a walk to maintain mobility. Sometimes it can be just from the car park to the closest hide. Other days I can get out for 2 or 3 hours and perch and look around and just enjoy it.
But generally mosquitoes are...
I think
we don't have much trouble with them.
If you ask me about mosquitoes, I'd say in our house here we haven't seen this summer I don't think we had a mosquito buzzing around. And I always associate mosquitoes with shallow water. I don't know if that's right, like stagnant water, isn't it? But around here, like the nature reserves are all quite deeper waters.
I don't really notice them so much when I'm out in the wetlands. If they come into my home, then I'm very aware of them because I react to being bitten. But when I'm out in the wetlands, whether I'm more covered or because I'm walking through it, I don't see a problem with them. And also, they're good food for bats.
They do have quite a significant impact on our life. I think we are so close to open water, and over the years, the 20 years that we've been here living as a couple here with our family, I would say that it has progressively year on year got worse.
Our ceilings and walls in the house are spotted with squash mosquitoes.
There is loads of mosquitoes down here, I guess because it is so wet. So yeah, in the evenings, especially like summertime, you can go out and it's just humming. Like you can just see like clouds of them, they're everywhere. And 2 of my younger sisters, they have to sleep under mosquito nets because it's that bad some of the time. But yeah, there is a lot of them down here. It does quite affect the animals as well, and they get bitten as well. We have to use a lot of like repellent and stuff. Mostly the horses you see it in, they get really irritated by them. Some like evenings you'll go out and they're all just galloping around trying to get rid of the mosquitoes.
They're a fact of life, and to be honest, they are probably the biggest factor in the food chain. There are billions of them out there, which means there's a lot of food here for other things.
I have to put sprays on to try and reduce being bitten, particularly when I'm trying to remain still and looking around. But they're also a food source for a lot of the insects, the damselflies in particular, and I kind of respect them as being part of a food web.
One night I was walking around and I bumped into a bunch of people, including my mate Dave. Dave was completely excited by the swarms of mosquitoes. Every single inch of air was vibrating with little buzzy insects. And Dave was in raptures about it, and he started talking about how the insects fed the fish, which was the beginning of the food cycle, and how important that was. And I suddenly started to see the significance of these irritating little buzzing things in the whole cycle of life. And I thought, perhaps if I can pick up some of Dave's massive enthusiasm for mosquitoes, it might help me be less irritated by them. And so I tried to learn to love the mosquito, and I did find that they annoyed me less.
If I was being consistent, I'd say I need to understand the sort of beings of mosquitoes and why they're there, and cherish them, no doubt, but I haven't got to that stage yet.
I mean, it is a concern that there are mosquitoes that vector malaria, and they're not far away. We have had them in this country before, and if it gets warmer, there's a fair chance they will come. But I think the main issue there is not to say, oh my God, there are mosquitoes coming. The main issue is, why are they coming? And it would be because of global warming. What are we going to do about that? And to be honest, I think people need to start waking up to that.
They could spread and bring their diseases over, because as we get warmer, they'll travel.
I think the climate is warming up and it's getting more moist, and I think it could be more of a problem as time goes on. And we're sitting here in a wetland, and we've already had blue tongue, these ticks that came over from France, generally moving up through Europe, and we had this with the cattle, with the blue tongue outbreak a few years ago. So things are coming our way. So I think it's something in the future that needs to be looked at and just monitored, I think would be the right word.
Monitoring it helps. It helps to know what species there are, it helps to know what relative numbers there are, so that if there are radical changes, and those radical changes are likely to impact on other organisms, then I think we need to know and make rational decisions about that.
We have a responsibility to people, especially if we're encouraging them onto the nature reserve. We know that we have Lyme disease in this area, so we're we don't stop people going on the reserve, and we don't stop staff and volunteers going on the reserve, but we have a strict protocol in place about how we manage people who get tick bites. If we do get mosquitoes that carry disease, how we approach that, and we educate people and explain what it's all about. That's the key. And you've got to be quite pragmatic about it, and not take away lots of really positive things that are good for people, or by sort of saying, no, you can't come to this landscape.
We're losing so much of our land culture and knowledge and skills that if we don't hold on to those things, they'll be gone. And then, I dread to think what will happen.
The village I grew up in when I was a little girl, it was farm after farm after farm, and now there's probably about 3 working farms left in the village.
And there was a lot of small farmers that had probably
with 10 cows, they had a big herd, and that was, you know, and that was what it was like on the moor. You know, you had 10, 20 cows, you were quite a big farmer, whereby nowadays, I don't think you would survive unless you had a couple hundred cows.
Agriculture machinery, another thing that's got massive, really, really big.
Broke Trevor's heart the other day because he's got a tractor, and the bloke that came out to mend it said, "You've just got a smallholder's tractor." Broke your heart, didn't it? Nobody ever told you that before.
No.
It's being able to generate enough money to live, isn't it? That's what it boils down to. That's the nitty gritty of it.
People have got to live out here and make a living. Otherwise, you know, you won't have enough people to manage it.
Once the local people are gone and there's nothing being generated, no income, the villages become dormitories, don't they?
And land has to be managed. You can't just leave
No.
land.
Management is how you keep the nature there. Without the management, if that's lost, it's gone.
A tough place to live, and my only worry is that there's going to be no youngsters here to do it. You know, it is hard. You know, people say they have wet farms. They haven't got a wet farm until they come here. No way if they got a wet farm till they come down here.
I just want a future in farming because I enjoy it.
Yeah. That's the frustrating part about it.
You know, they're still farming and they're still trying to, you know, make a living on it. And my passion is to try and find ways that, you know, the way people buy food, we can support those people and make their income viable. Because without them, the levels will just be, I don't know, a very empty and barren space, I think. They're the people who animate it and bring it to life.
Different stakeholders have different interests. So you've got, you know, for example, you might have an interest group like bird watchers that like the sites, for example, because it's special because they can see lots of rare birds there, and that maybe if there's lots of, say, families coming through, or, you know, people that maybe, you know, aren't really necessarily interested in the birds, but they just want to be in the landscape. Sometimes you might get a conflict.
I've been through Ham Moor with my grandchildren, and people have asked them to be quiet, you know, because they're watching birds, and I think, hold on a minute, you know, they're 5 and 7, so leave them alone.
Sometimes the dog walkers don't really understand that there are areas of the reserve that are really there for the animals that live there in the wild, and they can't go. So, you know, some of them get a bit irate at times.
There's been a big increase in big vehicles driving around on the roads which aren't really suited.
The roads do get in an atrocious state very quickly and are forever being patched, and that is a cause of concern amongst people who live here.
I think there's more people aware of the levels now, and whether that's a good or bad thing, I don't know, but because sometimes they're just not aware of where to park. And so, for example, when the starlings come, they just park anywhere, don't they? And to actually go around and do the daily, you know, like counting and things like that, you know, that you come back and you say, my gosh, you know.
We're lucky in this particular area because we don't get too many people, so it's not a clutter of cars. And it's a bit sad when you go to some of the bird watching sites that it's knee deep in cars and people and noisy, and that's not what it's about, really.
I think there was quite a battle between the conservationists and the farmers back in the 70s. It becomes the Battle of Sedgemoor when they decided to designate these areas as triple SIs overnight because somebody was going to drain a large area of it. And that became quite a battle for quite a few years. But that has subsided now, and the farmers who are trying to farm it have realised that, you know, it is a special area and there's not much left. And as long as you get compensated for dealing with the problems you get and the less grazing you've got out there, then I think it can work.
Water levels is always a massive issue. Farmers generally want to try and get the land dry because it's much easier to farm and manage, and in conservation you want it generally you want it wetter because it benefits birds and insects and everything. So it's trying to find that balance really.
It shouldn't be so high as it is, because you get, in our mind, you get more problems by having the fields too wet in the summer than if they were allowed to be naturally dry, you know, the peatlands. You know, they need a certain amount of moisture, but not as much moisture
as they've got
they're
now.
holding in them now.
The higher the water table, the less usable your land is and the harder it is to get on.
The water table as it was before was perfect for the wildlife here. And it's, yeah, probably some wildlife has came here since there was a water table. Most of it's gone because of the water table.
You know, the land is all owned by someone. You know, the drainage boards don't own the land, so why should they have the right to flood it?
The water table is a lot lower now than what it was when I was young. I mean, these fields, it was like a sponge. You would walk on it and you would sink down and come back, the ground would just come back. But now, I mean, it's quite firm and you can drive tractors and things over where you couldn't have done sort of 30, 40 years ago.
This is a floodplain, so it floods. So there are issues around how the floodplains are going to respond in the future. You know, particularly around extreme events. So you know, extremes of rain or extremes of drought as well.
I think we're just going to have to get used to it being wetter for longer, because Glastonbury's expanding. The water can only come one way down the Brew. It gets in
There's so many places up there for it to hold.
Yeah.
Before it comes here, it's kind of. Now it just comes here. Before it used to hold up in Glastonbury and then slowly push down.
But now it gets here a lot quicker than it ever
Yeah.
used to. But it's not only Glastonbury, it's further upstream as well. So I think we're going to get more flooding in the future.
You're never going to stop all the flooding because, you know, we've got the Brew just down here, but there are certain times when water should be pumped and it's not pumped.
Sometimes they're quite keen to like get the farmer more involved.
Yeah.
Whereas some of them are more like, oh, that's what we've got to do, that's what the bit of paper says, that's what we're going to do.
We need to continue talking to farmers, and to be honest, we can't do it ourselves. The nature reserves can't work in isolation. It has to be done in conjunction with the wider landscape and the landowners and farmers, because actually they manage most of the land and they're the ones that can make the real big difference, I think.
My vision for the future would be a lot of smaller scale enterprises, people earning livelihoods, doing things that are useful and productive, you know, producing food.
I would like the work that is already being done, not only, of course, by Natural England, by Somerset Wildlife, by the Hawk and Owl Trust, the RSPB, and I'm not careful, I'll leave somebody out. But all these organisations that are working on this, I would like to see that continue. I think it's very worthwhile.
Certainly Natural England would like to see is the partnership we have here on the Avon Marshes between all the organisations is really amazing, and you actually get so much more by all working together and being able to create such a large area of wetland. The amount of species that can come and use the area, you know, if we only had Shapwick or only had Moor or only had Westhay, you wouldn't have the richness.
I love the wildlife. To me, the wildlife is 50% of what we do, and as farmers we look after the wildlife, and we always have done. We look at the moors as places where birds breed, and you know, it's a habitat that needs to be looked after. And I think unless us farmers, who manage the land and manage it properly, it won't sustain it into the future.